The heavy oak door of the chapel closed with finality that echoed through the hollow space. Usha Vance, the brilliant Yale-educated attorney known for her unshakable composure, collapsed to her knees. For months, she had been a picture of dignity, standing beside her husband J.D. Vance at political events, navigating Washington's elite circles with intellectual precision, never once letting the world see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But now, those cracks had shattered into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrollable, as her body shook with sobs so violent they seemed to tear at her very soul. Outside, aides shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances. They had heard many things in their line of work, but never anything like this. Never the sound of Usha Vance breaking. She clutched a worn Bible so tightly her knuckles turned white, the leather cover creasing under the pressure of her desperation. Her voice, usually measured and articulate, trembled as she whispered words that would change everything. "God, please don't let Erica take my family." The plea hung in the air, thick with anguish and terror. This wasn't just a woman crying. This was a warrior admitting defeat, a strategist acknowledging she was out of moves, a wife facing the possibility of losing everything to an enemy who had infiltrated not just her home, but her husband's very soul. As her shoulders heaved with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears, those standing outside the chapel door understood with chilling clarity. Whatever battle Usha Vance had been fighting in private, she had finally reached her breaking point. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, something extraordinary was about to be born. For months, the storm had been gathering behind closed doors, invisible to the public eye but wreaking havoc within the Vance household. What began as subtle concern had evolved into a quiet terror as Usha watched Erica Kirk weave herself deeper into the fabric of their lives. At first, it seemed innocent enough, a shared prayer here, a spiritual insight there, a gentle guidance that J.D. seemed to crave. But Usha, with her analytical mind and immigrant resilience, recognized the pattern immediately. Erica wasn't just offering friendship. She was constructing an emotional dependency, positioning herself as the spiritual compass J.D. apparently lacked. The transformation in her husband was gradual yet undeniable. His late-night conversations with Erica grew longer, his references to her wisdom more frequent, his defensiveness sharper whenever Usha dared to question the intensity of their connection. Usha's world began to shrink as her anxiety expanded. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, her mind racing through every interaction, every text, every knowing glance exchanged between J.D. and Erica. Meals went untouched, her once vibrant energy dimming to a flicker as she withdrew from friends who couldn't comprehend the spiritual battle waging in her home. The brilliant attorney who once commanded courtrooms now struggled to command her own household, her confidence eroded by the constant presence of a woman who spoke in prophecies and divine purpose. But what began as concern quickly morphed into terror when Usha realized this wasn't merely marital strife. It was spiritual warfare for J.D.'s very soul. Erica's influence had grown so profound, so manipulative, so spiritually dangerous that Usha believed only divine intervention could save her marriage. She watched as her husband, the man who had built his political career on authenticity and connection, slowly drifted into someone else's ideological orbit. The man who once sought Usha's counsel now quoted Erica's interpretations of Scripture as if they were gospel. The weight of this realization pressed down on Usha until she could barely breathe, until the walls of their picture-perfect life felt like they were closing in. And as she knelt in that chapel, tears staining the pages of her Bible, Usha understood that something had to give, that the woman who never broke had finally reached her breaking point. What happened next in that quiet room would change everything about how this battle would be fought, transforming a private struggle into a public declaration of war against the forces threatening to tear her family apart. Erica Kirk didn't just stumble into influence. She engineered it with precision of a master manipulator, crafting an image of divine purpose that masked a predatory hunger for power. On the surface, she embodied everything conservative Christian America adored. Poised, articulate, draped in modest yet elegant clothing, her voice a soothing balm that promised spiritual clarity in chaotic times. She built her empire not on theological depth, but on emotional intelligence, understanding exactly how to make powerful men feel chosen by God. Her ministry wasn't built in megachurches, but in the private rooms of political conferences, the backstage areas of conservative events, and the encrypted messaging apps of Washington's elite. Erica possessed an uncanny ability to identify vulnerability in men like J.D. Vance. Those who rose from humble beginnings carried deep-seated insecurities and hungered for a sense of divine destiny that would validate their ambitions. She didn't just offer spiritual guidance. She manufactured dependency, positioning herself as the essential interpreter of God's will for their lives. Her methods were subtle, yet devastatingly effective. She'd begin with seemingly innocent Bible verses tailored to their specific struggles, then progressed to personalized prophecies about their divine purpose, eventually creating an emotional intimacy that blurred professional boundaries. Men found themselves sharing their deepest fears and marital frustrations with her, convinced these confessions were part of some sacred journey rather than emotional betrayal. What made Erica particularly dangerous was her mastery of spiritual language. She could twist scripture to justify her encroachment on marriages, framing her interference as God-ordained intervention. She'd whisper phrases like, "Your destiny is bigger than your current circumstances," or "God is calling you to something greater if you're brave enough to step into it," planting seeds of dissatisfaction that she alone could supposedly help cultivate. Behind closed doors, former associates described a different Erica, one who meticulously tracked the influence she held over powerful men, who strategized about how to position herself as indispensable to their rise, who viewed their wives not as partners but as obstacles to be overcome. She kept detailed notes on their insecurities, their marital tensions, their political aspirations, all weaponized later to deepen her control. The pattern was consistent across multiple cases. Identify a rising male figure with spiritual hunger, insert herself as his exclusive spiritual advisor, gradually isolate him from other influences, including his spouse, then position herself as the essential woman in his divine journey. She'd done it before J.D. Vance, and she would do it again if not stopped. What made her particularly insidious was her ability to make her targets feel special, chosen, anointed, while simultaneously making their wives feel inadequate, insecure, and spiritually inferior. She never explicitly advocated for divorce or infidelity. Instead, she created a narrative where the wife's spiritual limitations were holding back God's plan for the husband's life. As her influence grew, so did her arrogance. She began to believe her own narrative, that she wasn't just a spiritual advisor, but a prophetess uniquely positioned to shape America's political landscape through the men she guided. She saw herself as a modern-day Deborah, calling men to their divine destinies, blind to the destruction left in her wake. By the time she entered the Vance orbit, Erica had perfected her craft, her methods honed through years of practice, her confidence bolstered by the success she'd had with other influential men. She viewed J.D. not just as another political figure, but as her most significant opportunity yet. A man with national potential who could amplify her own influence if properly guided. And Usha Vance, with her different faith tradition and intellectual approach to spirituality, represented merely another obstacle to be neutralized on Erica's path to greater power. What Erica failed to recognize was that in targeting Usha Vance, she had finally met a woman who wouldn't break silently, who wouldn't accept being pushed aside in the name of divine destiny, and who possessed both the intellect and resilience to fight back against the spiritual predator invading her marriage. Usha Vance didn't just break barriers. She rewrote the rules, carrying the dreams of generations on her shoulders as she ascended from immigrant daughter to one of Washington's most formidable legal minds. Born to parents who sacrificed everything for her American dream, she learned early that excellence wasn't optional. It was survival. Her childhood was a tapestry of two worlds, the rich traditions of her heritage and the relentless ambition of her adopted country. While other children played, Usha was mastering English, devouring books, and absorbing the unspoken lesson that in America, an immigrant must work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. That drive propelled her to Yale, where she didn't just excel, she dominated, graduated with honors that silenced anyone who dared question her place in those hallowed halls. As a young attorney, she built a reputation not just for her brilliant legal mind, but for her unwavering moral compass. Colleagues admired how she could dismantle opponents with surgical precision while maintaining a dignity that disarmed even the most hostile adversaries. It was this combination of intellect and integrity that first drew J.D. Vance to her, He recognized in Usha a partner who could match his ambition while grounding him in values that transcended political expediency. Their marriage wasn't just a union of two people. It was a fusion of minds, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared vision. Together, they navigated the treacherous waters of political life, with Usha serving as both confidant and strategist, her legal training providing a framework for understanding the complex power dynamics they faced. But what made Usha uniquely perceptive was her immigrant perspective. Having grown up between cultures, she developed an almost preternatural ability to read subtext, to detect when people's words didn't match their intentions, to recognize when power was being wielded under the guise of kindness. This skill, honed through years of code switching and navigating spaces not designed for someone like her, became her greatest asset as she watched Erica Kirk's influence grow. Usha noticed the subtle shifts immediately. The way JD's eyes lit up when Erica spoke, how he began to reference her insights in conversations that once would have been theirs alone, how his spiritual language gradually shifted to mirror Erica's particular brand of performative piety. What others dismissed as harmless mentorship, Usha recognized as something more dangerous, a spiritual colonization of her husband's heart and mind. Her different faith tradition, rather than making her vulnerable, gave her clarity. She wasn't blinded by the Christian rhetoric Erica wielded so expertly. Instead, she saw the manipulation beneath, the way Erica used scripture as a weapon to create dependency. As Usha witnessed JD's transformation, she drew on resilience that had carried her through every challenge of her immigrant journey. The same determination that had propelled her through Yale law now fueled her fight for her marriage. She began documenting everything, patterns of behavior, concerning conversations, moments when Erica crossed lines that should never be breached in a marriage. Her analytical mind, once used to build legal cases, now constructed a meticulous record of Erica's encroachment. But Usha wasn't just fighting with intellect. She was fighting with heart. The love that had drawn her to JD remained. Even as she watched him drift toward Erica's orbit, she remembered the man who had seen her, truly seen her, when others only saw her immigrant background or her gender. She recalled how he had celebrated her successes, stood by her during difficult cases, built a life where both their ambitions could flourish. This memory of their partnership became her anchor as the storm gathered. What made Usha particularly dangerous to Erica was that she couldn't be easily dismissed as insecure or spiritually inadequate. Her credentials were impeccable, her faith deep though different, her understanding of power dynamics sophisticated. She represented everything Erica feared, a woman who couldn't be manipulated with spiritual language, who wouldn't be cowed by religious authority, who possessed both the intellect to see through the manipulation and the courage to confront it. As Usha prepared for the battle ahead, she drew strength from her journey, from the parents who taught her resilience, from the immigrant community that showed her solidarity, from professional accomplishments that proved her worth in spaces that often questioned it. She wasn't just fighting for her marriage. She was fighting for every woman who had been told she wasn't enough, every immigrant who had been made to feel like an outsider, every person of faith who had watched their spirituality be weaponized against them. And as she stood at the precipice, ready to confront both her husband and the woman who sought to replace her, Usha Vance knew that this battle would require every ounce of her intelligence, every bit of her cultural wisdom, and all the resilience her journey had forged within her. When Usha Vance walked through her front door that evening, something radiated from her that J.D. Vance had never witnessed before, a quiet certainty that both unsettled and commanded attention. The woman who had entered the chapel broken emerged carrying a strength that seemed almost supernatural. J.D. stood waiting, his anxiety palpable as he paced the living room, phone clutched tightly in his hand. Hours of unanswered calls and texts had frayed his nerves, but nothing prepared him for the transformed woman before him. "Usha, what happened? Why did you disappear like that?" His voice carried equal parts concern and frustration. She met his gaze directly, her eyes clear despite their redness. "I had to speak to God alone," she replied, her voice steady yet soft. JD's frown deepened. "You scared everyone. You scared me." But Usha didn't crumble. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke the words that would ignite the confrontation. "God showed me what's happening, JD. Erica isn't just guiding you, she's replacing me." JD recoiled as if struck. Usha, this again? Really? After everything you put yourself through today? Usha didn't back down. It's not again, JD. I've been silent for months, watching, waiting, hoping I was wrong. But I'm not. Her voice remained controlled. Yet beneath it ran a current of pain so profound it made JD's chest tighten. You're letting her into places that belong only to us. To this marriage. JD's defensiveness flared. That's not fair. She's a friend, a spiritual advisor. You're reading too much into this. Usha shook her head slowly, her expression shifting from hurt to resolve. No, JD. I'm seeing clearly for the first time. She stepped closer, her voice cracking with emotion. When was the last time you sought my advice before making a decision? When was the last time you shared your spiritual struggles with me instead of her? When was the last time you looked at me the way you look when she speaks? JD opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, thick with uncomfortable truths he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge. Usha continued, her voice trembling but unwavering. I've watched you slipping away, one scripture at a time. I've watched her build an emotional world with you that excludes me, and I beg God to show me what to do. JD's anger began to crumble, replaced by dawning horror as he recognized the truth in her words. But the real turning point came when Usha pulled out her phone, her hand shaking slightly. I need you to hear something, she whispered. Before JD could protest, she pressed play and Erica's voice filled the room, soft, intimate, dripping with emotional possession. JD, I'm praying for you right now. I feel God pulling you toward something bigger, something deeper, something you won't reach if you stay where you are. Don't let fear hold you back. You're meant for something divine. As the message ended, the silence that followed was deafening. JD stared at the phone as if it had physically attacked him, his face pale with shock and sudden understanding. The words weren't just spiritual guidance. They were a siren call, an invitation to leave his marriage behind in pursuit of some grander destiny Erica had convinced him was his birthright. Usha watched the realization dawn on her husband's face, her heart breaking even as her resolve strengthened. That's not ministry, JD, she said quietly. That's seduction disguised as spirituality. JD sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair as the weight of his betrayal crashed over him. I didn't think she meant it that way, he stammered. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were a lie. He had known. He had simply chosen not to see. And in that moment of devastating clarity, both understood that their marriage wasn't just in trouble. It was under spiritual attack. And the battle lines had just been drawn in ways neither could have anticipated. The silence in the Vance household hung heavy after Erica's voice message faded, each word echoing like a spiritual grenade detonated in their living room. JD stared at the phone, his face ashen with dawning horror, while Usha watched it with an intensity that suggested she was seeing her husband clearly for the first time in months. The way of what they had just heard settled between them. Erica wasn't just offering guidance. She was positioning herself as a divine alternative to Usha, suggesting that JD's destiny required leaving his marriage behind. I need to call her, Usha said suddenly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. JD's head snapped up. No, Usha, let me handle this. I'll end it. She shook her head slowly, a new resolve hardening in her eyes. No, JD, this isn't just about ending it anymore. This is about exposing it. She needs to know that I see exactly what she's doing. Before JD could protest, Usha dialed Erica's number, putting the call on speaker. The phone rang twice before Erica's voice came through, smooth as silk, dripping with false concern. Usha, I've been praying for you. How are you, dear? The condescension was barely veiled, but Usha remained calm. I think it's time we talked, Erica. Woman to woman. A brief pause. Then Erica's voice softened further. Of course, sweetheart. I'm here for whatever you need. JD's jaw tightened at the term of endearment, but Usha pressed on. What exactly do you think you need from my husband? Erica sighed dramatically. Usha, I sense so much fear in your voice. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. You know, I'm simply supporting JD in his spiritual journey. Usha's voice remained measured. At 2 a.m, with messages about how he's meant for something divine beyond his current circumstances. The warmth in Erica's tone cooled slightly. Sometimes God doesn't keep business hours, dear. When he moves, we must be ready to listen. JD couldn't remain silent any longer. Erica, this is JD. We need to talk about boundaries. Erica's voice brightened instantly. JD, I'm so glad you're there. God told me you'd be seeking clarity today. JD's frustration boiled over. Stop it. Stop using God to justify inappropriate behavior. Those messages, those late-night calls, they're not ministry. They're emotional manipulation. A frosty silence followed before Erica responded, her voice losing its honey quality. I see Usha's been poisoning your mind against me. This is what happens when spiritually weak women feel threatened by God's anointed. Usha leaned closer to the phone, her voice trembling but firm. I'm not weak, Erica. I'm a woman who recognizes when someone is trying to dismantle her marriage under the guise of spiritual guidance. Erica's laugh was sharp and humorless. Is that what you think this is? Usha, I've been where God asked me to be. If you were fulfilling JD's spiritual needs, I wouldn't need to be involved at all. JD slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. You've crossed line after line, Erica. This ends now. Erica's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You don't end what God starts, JD. You're speaking against things you don't understand. Usha took a deep breath, her next words carefully chosen. I understand perfectly. You saw my husband's platform, his power, his influence, and you decided his soul was a stage you could stand on. You prayed for his future wife, while I was still alive and married to him. You've been systematically working to replace me. The mask finally slipped. Erica's voice, no longer attempting warmth, dripped with contempt. If you were strong enough, God wouldn't have needed someone like me to speak where you stayed silent. JD gasped, but Usha remained eerily calm. There it is. The truth finally comes out. You don't see me as JD's partner. You see me as an obstacle to be removed. Erica's response was chilling in its certainty. God removes obstacles to his will, Usha, every day. JD grabbed the phone, his voice shaking with rage. This is over, Erica. Don't contact us again. Don't contact me. Don't contact anyone associated with our family. You're done. Erica's laugh sent chills down both their spines. You think this ends because you say so? JD, God brought us together for a purpose. You can fight it, but you can't change what's already been set in motion. Usha's voice cut through the tension, clear and resolute. Watch us. The line went dead. JD and Usha stared at each other, the weight of what had just transpired settling between them. Erica hadn't denied anything. She had defended her actions as divinely ordained, revealing a delusion so profound it bordered on dangerous. She truly believed God had appointed her to replace Usha in JD's life and ministry. JD sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. I never thought she would. Usha placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. The question isn't what she believes, JD. It's what she's willing to do to make her prophecy come true. As if on cue, Usha's phone buzzed with a new message. They both knew who it would be before looking. The screen displayed an unknown number, but the message left no doubt about its sender. You can block me, but you can't block what God has ordained. This battle has just begun. JD looked at Usha, fear and determination warring in his eyes. What now? Usha's gaze hardened with resolve. Now we fight back. Not just for our marriage, but for every person she's manipulated, every boundary she's crossed, every life she's tried to control under the disguise of divine calling. Outside their window, the first light of dawn was breaking, but inside the Vance home, a different kind of darkness had just been exposed, and with it, the terrifying realization that Erica Kirk wasn't just a misguided spiritual advisor. She was a predator who believed she was doing God's work, and there was nothing more dangerous than a person convinced heaven sanctions their destruction. The story didn't leak slowly. It detonated like a spiritual bomb across political and religious landscapes. By morning, 3 major political blogs had published anonymous tips hinting at a spiritual entanglement involving Senator J.D. Vance, his wife, and a prominent Christian influencer. None named Erica directly, but in the interconnected world of conservative Christianity, the The dots connected themselves instantly. One article quoted a source claiming, "The influencer weaponized prophecy to interfere with marriage," while another described a senator's wife undergoing emotional and spiritual distress due to an inappropriate prayer relationship. Screenshots began circulating like wildfire. The late-night emojis, the voice note timestamps, the chilling prayer table photo from the Iowa conference showing Erica's hand on JD's name card. They weren't explicit proof, but the implications alone were enough to ignite a media frenzy. Political Twitter exploded with speculation. Who's the influencer messing with J.D. Vance? One viral tweet asked. "I heard she convinced God told her to replace his wife," replied another with thousands of likes. Progressive commentators seized the narrative, framing it as yet another example of spiritual manipulation disguised as ministry. This is what happens when women use God to justify emotional affairs. One prominent feminist writer posted, "I've lived this. It starts with prayer and ends with destruction." Meanwhile, conservative circles split down the middle. Erica's loyal followers rushed to her defense. "She's being persecuted for her calling," one insisted. "This is what happens when weak women feel insecure about their husband's spiritual growth," declared another. But others, particularly women who had experienced similar spiritual manipulation, began sharing their own stories. "Stop using God to prey on men," one viral thread began. "This isn't ministry. It's spiritual abuse." Inside the Vance household, JD and Usha watched the chaos unfold on their phones. JD looked sick, his face pale as guilt settled heavily in his chest. "This got out fast," he whispered, but Usha remained silent, standing by the window with arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't spoken much since the confrontation, her expression unreadable as she processed the public exposure of their private pain. But the worst wasn't the leaks. It was Erica's response. Rather than hiding or issuing denials, Erica went live on her social media platform, a calculated performance filmed in soft lighting with a Bible strategically placed in her hand. "My heart is heavy today," she began, wiping away a dramatic tear as comments flooded in with messages of support. "It breaks my spirit that private spiritual guidance is being twisted into something sinister." JD clenched his jaw as Usha trembled beside him. Erica continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Some women become fearful when they see their husband stepping into God's purpose. Fear creates lies. Lies create division, and division is not from the Lord." Usha covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as Erica masterfully reframed the narrative, painting Usha not as a victim of manipulation, but as a spiritually weak woman resisting God's will. Then Erica dropped the bombshell. "I had a dream last night," she announced solemnly. "God revealed that someone close to a man of destiny is resisting his will. That's all I'll say." The comments erupted immediately. "It's the wife," one follower declared. "JD's spouse is blocking God's plan," wrote another. "Remove her, Lord," prayed a third. JD exploded in rage. "She's painting you as the enemy. She's turning her entire following against you." But Usha had moved beyond anger into something more dangerous, resolve. As Erica's live stream ended, a new notification appeared on Usha's phone. It was a photo posted by one of Erica's closest ministry allies, a picture taken 3 months ago showing JD and Erica praying together backstage at a conference. Their eyes were closed, hands touching, faces inches apart in a pose that looked undeniably intimate. The caption read, "Some connections are undeniable. Some bonds are God-ordained." Usha stared at the image, her expression hardening. "She's building a narrative," she whispered, "and people are believing it." The comments section proved her right. Followers praised their spiritual alignment, while others noted how Erica was being attacked for her anointing. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Quietly, systematically, other women began coming forward. A pastor's wife messaged Usha privately. "We've seen this pattern before, prophetic women attaching themselves to married men. They call it calling. It's spiritual grooming." A staffer who had been present at the Iowa conference sent a voice note, sobbing as she described Erica's prayer for JD's future wife. "She never mentioned you once," the woman cried. "She talked like you were already gone." As the day progressed, The phrase "clear the path" began circulating like a curse, a reference to Erica's apparent belief that Usha needed to be removed for JD to fulfill his destiny. Donors grew nervous, with one fundraiser asking quietly, "Is Erica becoming a liability?" Another responded grimly, "She's becoming a headline waiting to happen." And as Usha watched her private nightmare become public spectacle, she understood something terrifying. Erica wasn't just fighting for influence anymore. She was fighting for survival, and a cornered predator with a spiritual ego was the most dangerous kind of all. Usha Vance stood at the crossroads of her life, the weight of public exposure pressing down on her shoulders as she watched her private nightmare unfold across social media and news outlets. The woman who had once navigated Washington's elite circles with quiet dignity now faced a choice: retreat into silence or step into the storm and reclaim her narrative. "I can't let her define me," Usha whispered, more to herself than to JD, who sat beside her looking haunted by his own complicity. "She's already turned me into the villain in her story, the spiritually weak wife standing in the way of God's plan." JD reached for her hand, but Usha pulled away, not in anger but in resolve. "If I stay silent, Erica wins. She gets to keep manipulating people, destroying marriages, using God as a weapon." Her voice strengthened with each word, the immigrant resilience that had carried her through Yale law now steeling her for this battle. "I'm going public, not with gossip, not with revenge, with truth." Before JD could respond, Usha's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. They both knew who it would be. The screen displayed a single line that made Usha's blood run cold. "If you speak publicly, I will reveal what JD told me privately." JD's face went white as he recognized the threat. Erica was planning to weaponize his moment of vulnerability, the confession he had shared during a supposed spiritual counseling session. Usha turned to him slowly, her eyes filled with hurt but not surprise. "JD, what did you tell her?" He swallowed hard, shame washing over him. "She asked about my biggest fear in marriage. I told her I was afraid you'd never understand the calling I felt." The confession hung between them, a painful reminder of how deeply Erica had infiltrated their relationship. But instead of crumbling, Usha drew herself up, her expression hardening with determination. "She thinks this confession gives her power. She thinks she can blackmail us into silence." She looked JD directly in the eyes, her voice trembling but unwavering. "But she's wrong, because what she doesn't understand is that truth is more powerful than manipulation. Integrity is stronger than intimidation." JD stared at his wife, seeing her with new clarity. The woman who had once seemed so composed now revealed as a warrior forged by adversity. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we go public, there's no going back." Usha nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond their window. "I've spent my life proving that immigrants belong, that women of color have a voice, that different perspectives strengthen our country. This is just another battle in that war." She took a deep breath, her next words carrying the weight of her entire journey. "Erica thinks she can use my husband's doubts against me. She thinks she can hide behind God while destroying families. But she's about to learn that women like me, we don't break. We rise." As she spoke, Usha Vance transformed before JD's eyes from a wounded wife into a formidable force, a woman who understood that sometimes the most spiritual act is to speak truth to power, even when that power claims divine authority. "This isn't just about our marriage anymore," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's about every person who's been manipulated by someone claiming God's endorsement. It's about drawing a line between genuine faith and spiritual abuse." JD finally understood what Usha had recognized in that chapel. This wasn't just a fight for their marriage, but a stand against the kind of religious manipulation that had destroyed countless lives before theirs. And as Usha picked up her phone to begin drafting her statement, both knew that Erica Kirk had finally met her match. Not in another spiritual influencer, but in a woman whose strength came not from performative piety, but from the unshakable foundation of her own worth. The battle lines had been drawn, and this time, Usha Vance wasn't just defending her marriage. She was reclaiming the narrative from those who would use God as a weapon, proving that true power doesn't come from spiritual manipulation, but from the courage to stand in your truth even when the whole world is watching. After everything you witnessed, the late-night messages, the prophetic manipulation, the spiritual blackmail, the public smear campaign, one truth stands undeniable. Usha Vance stepped onto a spiritual battlefield most women never see coming, armed only with her integrity and the fierce resilience forged through her immigrant journey. She didn't just confront a woman manipulating her marriage. She challenged an entire system that weaponizes faith to control and destroy. Now the question echoes through every corner of this unfolding drama. Should Usha go public with her truth, exposing Erica's manipulation for the world to see? Is she protecting her marriage or walking into Erica's carefully laid trap? Did JD cross emotional boundaries long before he recognized the danger, blinded by spiritual validation? And perhaps most chilling, is Erica genuinely deluded in her divine calling, or is she a calculated predator using God as the ultimate cover for her ambition? The battle lines are drawn, but this war is far from over. Erica Kirk has proven she'll stop at nothing to position herself as the woman anointed to stand beside J.D. Vance, even if it means dismantling his marriage in the name of divine destiny. What happens next will determine not just the future of the Vance family, but how society confronts spiritual abuse disguised as ministry. Share your theories in the comments below. Your insights matter in this fight. And if you're ready to witness the next chapter where voicemails leak, Erica's ministry fractures, and Usha discovers something even more disturbing about that Iowa prayer circle, then subscribe now and turn on all notifications. Because make no mistake, Erica Kirk is nowhere near finished, and the war for JD's soul has only just begun.